Hey adventurers, so today is going to be my wrap up for the month of October. I had a fairly good reading month. Let's see, it looks like 11 books that I finished in October. So the first one that I finished in October was The Hollow Hills by Mary Stewart. This is the second book in her Arthurian saga, I believe is what the series is called, or the Merlin trilogy is the first three books. And I read the first book in the series, which is called The Crystal Cave, and I read that in what month? May. I read that back in May. And so I've been wanting to get back to this series because I really enjoyed the first book and I really enjoy Arthuriana. And I liked the way that this story was written. I liked the style that it was being told in, the very epic fantasy in the very epic fantasy, kind of classic fantasy, if you want to use that term, if you can interpret what that might mean, genre in the style at least of how it was being written, while also being very Arthuriana. It's very much Arthurian literature and very much tells a story about not Arthur yet, but it's the first book was very much the Crystal Cave was about Merlin, and the Hollow Hills is also about Merlin, although it starts to incorporate there's a lot to do with Uther and there's a lot to do with a young Arthur. And so we're starting to get into the Arthurian story, that the classic tale that we know of Arthur. And so yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I really enjoyed continuing that series, and there's going to be several books this month that I feel like were potential contenders for a book of the month this month, and I had a lot of strong books, a lot of books that I really did enjoy quite a bit. The next one that I finished was The Last Sword of Power by David Gemmell. I'm not sure how you want to pronounce that name or how it's supposed to be pronounced, but that author, this is the second book in the Stones of Power duology, and I read the first Stones of Power book back, was it also May? Ghost King, and I read it back in March. And this one is one that I read with Liam from Liam's Lyceum. I don't know why we decided to buddy read those ones, but we did. They're also Arthuriana. It's kind of barely Arthuriana. It's more of Gemmell playing in the sandbox of Arthur, of the King Arthur myth, and doing his own thing with it. And it's really fun. It's a very fun series, a very different series. It's not faithful to the Arthurian myth at all, but at the same time, there's some things that are like, yeah, this is definitely Arthuriana, and not just because of the names of the characters and such. But yeah, I enjoyed this book as well quite a bit. I don't know if I enjoyed it more than the first book or not. There's some really good things about it, some really interesting things about it, and for sure I had fun with this duology, and I'm very glad to have read it. Not the best in terms of Arthuriana, but I think it's a fun story nonetheless. The next one that I finished is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is one where, once again, I ended up reading it not really with Liam from Liam's Lyceum, but in some ways I did, because he was reading it, and then I also happened to be reading it because there were some other booktube people who were reading it at the same time, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to be reading this one. Plus, it kind of fit. I don't read books for the season very often, and I'm not a Halloween person as it is, so I wasn't really reading it for that. Does happen to fit the season, but I wasn't particularly reading it for that reason. But I don't care for this cover a whole lot, although it is kind of an interesting choice. This is the copy that Kate has, and I'm sure I'll get my own copy at some point. I did read this book because I listened to it on audiobook, and actually what I did, I was looking for it and I was like, there's got to be a free audiobook for this somewhere. So I was looking on Audible to see if there was a free one on Audible. I was looking on my library to see if my library had one that was available at the time that I needed to. And what I found was that my library has one narrated by Jim Weiss. And Jim Weiss is a storyteller who tells stories and narrates audiobooks and stuff like that. And I have listened to him. He's kind of a what is the word? He's kind of a homeschool celebrity, if you want to call him that. He developed the not so much curriculum, although he has some curriculum that he's done stuff with, but primarily he is a resource to the homeschool communities, and he has these stories and these tales and these myths and these sometimes books that he narrates and stuff like that. And I have listened to him my entire childhood. I have hours of him memorized, of his tapes and CDs that are just memorized, and I quote them in my everyday life, every day type thing. He's kind of the voice of my childhood in many ways. And so when I found that he had a copy of this book, or that he had done an audiobook of Frankenstein, I was like, okay, I have to read that. And it's excellent. He's so good. I mean, I'm sure there's some nostalgia and some bias tied in with it, but he's just a genuinely excellent audiobook narrator as well, and voice actor. I realize that myself as an actor, there's a lot of the things that I do as an actor that, listening to Frankenstein, I realized, oh, I picked that up from Jim Weiss without realizing it. And it's so interesting to me that that's the case. But anyways, just fantastic experience with Frankenstein and fantastic experience with the audiobook as well. I haven't really talked about the book. I want to save most of my thoughts for my review of it because I have quite a few thoughts for it. But one of the things that I specifically noticed, and I'll have to go back and actually do some research. I probably will film my review before I do this so that or write it at least before I do this so that I can not have my review, my own thoughts influenced too much by other people. But what I feel like I remember from other people talking about Frankenstein is that there's this common idea that Frankenstein himself is the villain of this story, and he's not a good guy, and that he's just a horrible human being, and that he's the true monster, and that the monster is a victim throughout it all, and that the monster is not really a bad guy. Reading through this book, that is not what I came away with at all. Yes, the monster is misunderstood to some degree, and probably Frankenstein made some bad choices. Absolutely. Those things are both right. Those things I can both agree with. But the rest of that whole premise that the monster is really not the bad guy here, and that Frankenstein is really the monster, I don't know that I completely agree with, because that's at least not with the story that I read. I read a story where a monster developed sentience. Yes, he was created by Frankenstein, and that's probably a problem to begin with, but then the monster developed sentience and chose to go around murdering people. That is not something that a misunderstood, oh, he's not a bad guy type character does. No, he's straight up a villain. He's not a good... The monster is 100% a monster. Sure, maybe you can understand his motivations to some degree. Sure, maybe he is a little bit misunderstood. But that doesn't change the fact that he went around murdering people. And I don't... So at least my perception of what other people have been saying about this book, which may or may not be accurate, I can't tell for certain because I don't remember and I haven't listened to people recently talk about it, but whatever the case is, my understanding of what people... My perception of my understanding of what people say about this book is drastically different than the experience that I had. So anyways, that is the... I've talked way too long about this book. This is a long section on this one book, but the fact of the matter is I enjoyed this book. I have some different opinions than what I think other people have said, and I am very glad that I read it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. The next book I finished finally, and this is a physical book that I finished, is Rackety-Tam by Brian Jakes. This is one that I started reading 2-3 years ago, something like that. I think I started reading it in 2023, if I remember correctly. I believe it's 2023 that I started reading it. And so it's been a good long while since I started reading Rackety-Tam, and it's just been one of those things where I've read a couple chapters in between picking up other books, and because of that, it has taken me far too long to get through it. Luckily, I know the story, and luckily I know Redwall, the series, and Brian Jakes as an author well enough that it really didn't affect my enjoyment of the book at all, and it really didn't affect my understanding of the story or what was going on or how things played through it or the characters or anything like that. I pretty much maintained that through line of understanding from when I first started reading it back in 2023 all the way until now. And that's kind of interesting. That's kind of a unique experience for me because I don't generally do that. There's some books that have taken me a long time to read, but this is probably the longest at this point that I've ever read. And so greatly enjoyed this book, as I do with all the Redwall books. This has always been one of my favorites. I love the fact that the main character is a squirrel, specifically Rackety-Tam. He's always been one of my favorite Redwall characters. I love the fact that the villain is a Wolverine. That's a super interesting character or species that we've never seen in this series before. And so I love seeing that. I love the whole walking stone stuff and all that. And there's just a lot of really fun stuff in this book that's unique to this book, and I really appreciate that. So yeah, Rackety-Tam is a super fun one. At some point when I finish the entire series, I will be able to rank them, but I would say with fairly good certainty that this is probably top 5, definitely top 10. And I know there's only 22 books, but those top 5 are very, very hard to get into because those are like the best of the best, the top 3 even more so. But Raggedy Tam is up there. Raggedy Tam is one of my favorite Redwall books for sure. The next one I finished is The Prophet of Edan by Philip Chase. This is the second book in the Edan trilogy, and I read the first, when did I read the first one? Is that in January maybe? I think that let's see, The Way of Edan. Yep, back in January is when I read the first book in this series. And so I wanted to read the second book and continue with the series. It's not a series that's just like my absolute favorite of all time or anything like that, but I really appreciate it and really like a lot of the things that Chase is doing. And I like seeing how he incorporates his knowledge and understanding and skills with medieval literature and ancient literature and languages and all the things that he has studied, and those things are incorporated into his storytelling. I like that. I appreciate seeing that. I like seeing the craft that he puts into these books as well. There's a lot of interesting things to it. Primarily, it took me so long to get back to this because I was waiting on the audiobook to come out. The audiobook finally came out, I don't know, September or something like that. And so it's taken me a little bit to get to it, but it was fairly quickly that I got back to the audiobook of this once it actually came out. And I am glad that I read it. I am looking forward to the third book. This is not, unless the third book is just something life-changing, I don't think this series is going to be a top series for me, but I do really enjoy it and I really appreciate a lot of what's going on here. I do notice a little bit of, and I mean, I can't really fault him for this because other authors do the same thing, but there's definitely a lot of religious aspects tied into this story, and he's definitely writing not from a Christian perspective, or at least the religion that you are supposed to assume is the true religion in this series is not Christianity based. And I can't say that I agree with that, but at the same time, it is a fantasy story. I can accept that it's a fantasy story, and I can also accept that other people have different religions than me. And I don't know what Chase considers himself to be, what religion he considers himself to be, but there's definitely some things about what he does with the religions in this series, while maintaining historical accuracy, is also kind of weird and not my favorite. And that's all fine. He's allowed to write the story that he wants to write, and I'm glad that he's telling the story that he wants to tell. It's an interesting series for me. It's not really my favorite, but I do greatly appreciate it and I enjoy it quite a bit. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the final book in that trilogy whenever it is released on audio. The next one that I finished is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is one where I went into it. Again, I wasn't specifically reading it it wasn't one that I was reading specifically for the season, although it does happen to be Halloween when I was reading it in October. It wasn't the reason why I was reading it, but that's just kind of something that happened at the same time. And this is another one where other people were reading it, so I was like, I guess I will jump into that one too, because actually, specifically, the reason why I picked this one up. My coworker was reading it, listening to it, and she came over to me and was talking to me about how it starts off telling the story of Jonathan Harker. Is that his name? Jonathan Harker, I think. And let's see, is that right? Jonathan Harker, yes. And he, the part of his story that's happening, he's traveling and he's been eating these foods seasoned with paprika, and they're too spicy for him, and he's just like dying from the spice from the paprika. And I was just like, okay, I've got to read this. And just the way that she was describing it to me made me be like, okay, this is something that I do actually need to read right now. Partly so I can talk about it with her, but also just so that I can have it read, because it is one that I needed to have read. And yeah, so I read it, enjoyed it greatly in a lot of ways. It's very dark. It's very weird. I know so much of random pieces of this story from pop culture, and sometimes even only from trailers to movies, like the Renfield trailer, or the Last Voyage of the Demeter trailer, or whatever those films were called, or whatever. And also they're just random pop culture things that I know. And obviously when you're adapting a film, you're going to make the film however you want to make the film, and you're going to make an adaptation and all that stuff. And so what I know from pop culture doesn't necessarily directly reflect back onto this book, and that's fine. I understand that. But it's just so interesting to me that now I understand all those references, even if I didn't at the time that they were coming out or whatever it was. And it was very interesting read, very dark read, very creepy. There's a lot of darkness, a lot of depravity that goes into this book. But at the same time, there's some very interesting stuff going into this book. Some very interesting storytelling. Of course, the fact that it's epistolary is a unique way to tell the story as it is, a lot of the darkness is hidden by the fact that these are journal entries by characters who don't actually know what's going on, and you only slowly uncover what's going on as time progresses. And so we as the audience, especially through pop culture and through time, have come to understand a lot more about this book. But I think that if you didn't have that, you would be, what's the word? Obscured. Your understanding would be obscured enough by the way that the story is being written that you would not quite see how truly dark and horrible and depraved these actions are. And so that's kind of an interesting part to this story. It is an interesting story for sure, and I'm very glad to have read it, but I also understand that this is not a good story. It's a good story. It's not a good, like, full of goodness and light and happiness and joy and good things. That's not what this book is, and that's not what this book is supposed to be. And I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate what the book is trying to do, and I can enjoy the book while at the same time being like, wow, this is a lot. So anyways, I read Dracula as well, and that was an interesting one for sure. The next one that I listened to is The God of Story by Daniel Schwabauer. This is a nonfiction that he wrote talking about storytelling and talking about how he sees the world through storytelling, and specifically in relation to God and the Bible. And that is something that I myself have been thinking about and developing my own thoughts and ideas on this over the past several years. I've talked several times about how I see the world through the lens of story, and it's very clear after reading this book that that's exactly how Schwabauer sees the world as well, which I kind of knew. But anyways, I read this one, and I don't agree with him theologically in a lot of areas, but I also can definitely agree about the way that we often, well, the premise of the book is essentially that we need to be viewing the Bible through the lens of storytelling, as well as through all these other religious lenses and everything that we view it through in the way that we as Christians tend to. But then specifically, oftentimes in Christianity, we remove the storytelling aspect of that. And what we need to understand is that God is telling a story through the Bible. That is part of the story, but also through creation, through history. All these things are part of that story, and we need to understand stories, and we need to understand what God is doing with the storytelling of the world and of the Bible. And that premise is something that I really appreciate and that I definitely agree with, even if I disagree with some of the theology that he seems to believe. I really appreciate his basic premise of the book, and it's something that has actually helped me in understanding. I've mentioned this before as well, that I have been searching and trying to find a way for me to understand storytelling, because I can't figure out how to tell a story. I can't figure out, unless I have the beginning and the ending and some points along the way, I can't connect those things. I have to have those things in order for me to tell the story. And it's very hard for me to figure out how to create that story. And I have to just slowly, if I don't have those things, it takes me so long to actually build the story. And so what I needed is, like so many of these other authors have, the save the cat outline, or whatever it is, in order for you to understand, okay, you need to do these things in order to build a story. And those things have never worked for me. I don't quite understand them. Like, they don't click with me in the same way. And so I was looking for somebody else who might. I've been looking for something, and I don't think this is quite everything that I need, but I think it's helped me a lot through this The God of Story book that Schwabauer wrote. And so I read that one in part looking for that, but also because I was curious what he had to say about this, and also because this idea of storytelling and God's story and all that stuff coming together, it's all stuff that I have been thinking about and building in my own mind for a long time. So it's kind of just, when I saw that he was releasing this book, I was like, okay, that's one that I want to read. I know that I want to read it. But then when I also finally went and looked for it this month and saw that there is an audiobook, I was like, perfect. I want to read these. I'm super excited to read these. I definitely need to. And so yeah, I had very good time with this one. Very enjoyable, very insightful, and I really appreciate what he did with this one. I am probably going to put this book as my favorite of the month, even though I had books like Frankenstein and Dracula and The Hollow Hills and stuff like that, some other very strong books. This one, I think, due to how beneficial it was for me as a reader and as a storyteller, I think that that is probably going to be my book of the month. I do have a couple more. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So this is a mystery thriller from Agatha Christie. I have had a little bit of an interesting relationship with Agatha Christie. My first exposure to her, I would say that pretty accurately, even though maybe as a child I had a little bit more exposure to her. But really my first exposure was the Murder on the Orient Express film that came out in 2016, something like that. Whenever that came out fairly recently. And I love that film. That's a fantastic movie. I love the story. I love the way that Poirot is working through those things in his mind, the mystery that unfolds, the conclusion that we come to, everything about it is just, I really love that film. I think that's an excellent film. And so I went and read the book, and I was a little disappointed in the book. I didn't think it was that great. Along comes the second book, Death on the Nile, and I was like, okay, I'm going to read the book first this time and then go watch the film. And I read the book and I was like, the movie could probably improve on this, like it did with the first book. And so I went and watched the film, and it was worse. And I was like, okay, I don't love this film. The cast is good, but I don't love the film. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll see what I read next. And so I read another one. I read the first Poirot mystery, which is, I can't remember what it's called. Something, I don't know. I don't remember what it's called. And I was like, okay, yep, this is fantastic. As the narrator for that book which was Richard Armitage, the actor who played Thorin, for example. He's a great actor. He did a fantastic job narrating the audiobook, and I was like, okay, I don't love at least the Poirot novels. Maybe Christie is an author that I just don't love that much. And I didn't know if that was going to be the case or not, but I was like, okay, we'll try some other ones at some point. Along comes October, and there's once again people reading this book all at the same time, and it's like, okay, well, I will put it on hold and see if it comes through from my library before the end of the month. And lo and behold, it did. And so I listened to it, and I really enjoyed it. Actually, it's not my favorite book of all time, not my favorite mystery of all time, but it was very enjoyable. I suspected the perpetrator before it got to the end, although I wasn't positive. I was never positive up until they finally revealed who it was, but I suspected it. And then at the same time, I don't love the ending. I don't love how everything was revealed. There's a lot of things that I don't love about the book, but I enjoyed it a lot more than I have any of the other books that I've read by her. And I do know that this is considered one of, if not her best novel. And so that doesn't bode super well if this is her best, but at least I enjoyed it. I'm glad that I enjoyed it. I don't know how many other ones I will read and enjoy. I will probably continue trying them occasionally when I want to. But the simple takeaway from this book is I found one that I enjoyed, and I did enjoy it. So I'm glad for that. Yeah. The next one that I listened to, and this is one where, okay, so part of why I've been reading so many books this month, as well as kind of a fairly wide variety, a little bit wider than I probably normally do, is because the Keymark Discord was doing a readathon, a Monster Hunters Ball or something like that, where we were trying to read books that matched certain prompts so that we could kill certain monsters and so that we could get badges. And it's just kind of like a fun thing, kind of match what you're reading to one of the prompts as it is, unless you want to tailor your reading specifically to it as it is. And anyways, I was participating in that, and so one of the prompts was a book you DNF'd, to read a book that you DNF'd. And most of the books that I've DNF'd, I don't want to go back to ever. But there was one that I had soft DNF'd, and what I mean by that is I set it down for the moment because at some point I do want to go back to it, but it was just kind of not working for me at the moment, which is generally what soft DNF means. And so that was She by H. Rider Haggard. I have this book, the works of Haggard, and these are a whole bunch of his short stories and novellas and stuff like that. And so She is contained in this collection, this works of. And I previously, 2021 maybe, I was reading this one with David Wiley, and we both kind of just soft DNF'd it. We kind of put it down and didn't quite pick it up again, and then eventually a lot of time had passed and we both mentioned to each other, yeah, we kind of just fell off from reading it. And so it was one that I did want to go back and continue reading and to actually finish the story at some point, but I never did until this prompt came up where I was like, okay, let's see if she is available to listen to find an audiobook for. And I did find an audiobook for it, and this is a good story, not a great story. There's some good things about it, some really fun things about it. Definitely very influential, especially on Tolkien. There's a lot of things like the Mirror of Galadriel and the File of Galadriel to some degree are taken directly from this book. And so yeah, there's some interesting things here. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the story being told. It's not my favorite of all time, but I'm glad that I went back and finished it, and I suspected that was going to be the case. I did listen to it on an audiobook. I didn't finish it in this collection. I will also pop a picture up if I haven't already, because that's a good thing to do, because this is just a blank brown cover. But the rest of it is the actual book itself. And so yeah, I enjoyed the story. That's about all I have to say for it. I will try and do a review for it, and I will have some more thoughts when I do that. Two more books here. The next one that I finished, again, I was doing this, and I've been rereading this series, or I started rereading the series already, and that is, so the book is The Journey by Catherine Lasky. This is book 2 in the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series, and I read the first book, The Capture. I reread the first book, which is titled The Capture, back in June, and so I was planning to continue re-listening to this series, rereading the series on audio at some point, and it happened that one of the prompts for the Monster Hunters Ball readathon thingy is a reread from long ago. And so I was like, okay, well, this definitely fits with that. It was available on audiobook when I wanted it, and so I listened to it again. And I remember, for one, I love this series. I love the fact that it's a fantasy series about owls. That's great. And so I love that. And I went back to it. I reread The Capture, and it was fine. It wasn't fantastic, but it was decent. But I also remember thinking that The Capture is not my favorite. I went back to book 2, and I enjoyed book 2 a lot more. I think book 2 is a lot stronger of a story, even though this is kind of in a lot of ways, this is kind of the second act of the generic 3-act structure for this hero's journey, the classic hero's journey tale. And so because of that, we're kind of in that act 2, which is not always the most interesting, but I read this book and I was like, this is a much stronger book than the first book, and I enjoy it a lot more. And so yeah, that's my basic thoughts for The Journey. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I had a lot of fun rereading it, and I definitely want to continue the series as I had already planned to do. The last book that I finished and read in October is Cold Silver for Souls by Tori Tekken. This is Tori from Tori Talks. This is one of her books that she just released. This is a recent release. I believe this was, I can actually look. When was this book released? And it doesn't tell me the month. It was this year. I know it was early this year. I don't remember exactly how early, what month it was released in, but it's a fairly recent release, and I was very excited for it. I love Westerns. I love fantasy. It's a good combination. I enjoyed her book Phase. I really enjoyed her book The Bloodstones. In fact, it was my book of the year last year, 2024, I think. And so I was really looking forward to Cold Silver for Souls, and it failed. No, I'm just kidding. It was fun. It was a really fun book. It was a really good book. I love the Western aspect of it. It doesn't work for me quite as well as the Bloodstones did, but I still had a lot of fun with it, and I really enjoy it. And I definitely want to read more from the series, and obviously from the author. And this is book 1. Oh, I guess this is Shade Silver. Book 1 is the series. Shade Silver is the series. Book 1 is the number of the books that this is. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. This is based off of a short story that she wrote for the Advent of Winter anthology. And I read that anthology, was fascinated by the story, by the way that the things that she was doing with it, and the concept of a Christian author writing a story about a necromancer. That's a fascinating idea for me to play with, because most Christian authors refuse to touch necromancy, and if they do, it's only ever to say this is a horrible, dark, bad thing to do. I wanted to see what Tori was going to do with this, because I think I actually mentioned this to her at some point. I'm gonna try and get her on for an interview at some point soon, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about this, because I'm fascinated by this concept that she chose to play with a fantasy necromancer in a world that is has some very Christianity based religion in it, and her being a Christian author, that's a fascinating thing for her to explore, and I'm very interested to see her mindset with that. And so that alone was enough for me to read the book. Also the fact that I enjoyed the author is enough for me to read the book, and also the fact that it's a fantasy western. Enough for me to read the book. Lots of things going for it. It had a lot of fun, had a lot of interesting things to it. There's definitely some more stories that need to be told in this world, and she definitely has plans to. Definitely has plans to. Basic thoughts is that I really enjoyed Cold Silver. I had a lot of fun reading it, and I am very glad that I had the opportunity to physically read this book. And I did it over the course of like 10 days, which is fairly quick for me at the moment because I have been busy and I have not been prioritizing physical reading in the way that I need to, and also I haven't had time for a lot of physical reading for a while, and so I'm glad that I was able to dedicate some time to this and actually get through it. Plus it reads quick, and it's only 278 pages, so it's fairly short and it reads quick and it's fun. And yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I had a lot of fun with this, so I'm very glad that I enjoyed this one as well. So anyways, those are the 11 books that I finished. All 11 of these, with the exception of Rackety Tam, I started and finished in October. And I'm very excited, very glad for that. I could have probably read a couple more, except as you can probably still hear in this video, I got a cold on Wednesday. And so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I was not listening to audiobooks like I normally do when I'm sitting at work, and because of that I didn't get as many audiobooks. I probably could have fit one, maybe two more audiobooks in had that been the case, but I didn't, and so I ended up with 11 books, which is still a fantastic reading month for me. Horrible in terms of reviewing, because now I have 11 books that I have to write and film and edit reviews for and release, and that's a lot. That's a lot for 1 month when I only do 4 per month as it is. And so yeah, great reading month. Horrible for the scheduling of videos, but anyways, it was a good reading month, and I had a lot of fun with the variety and the books. I don't think there was a book that I didn't enjoy in this whole bunch, and a lot of really strong books, and so I'm very excited that that's the case. And yeah, it's also interesting to me that a nonfiction is my favorite book of the month. That doesn't happen very often, partly because I don't read nonfiction very often. But still, enjoyable, had a lot of fun. It was a good reading month for sure. Anyways, I have talked long enough, rambled long enough. I really hope that the video has actually filmed, because I'm just realizing now that I don't think I started the video, or at least I don't remember if I did. Hopefully I did. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. We post videos every Monday and Thursday, and our social media is linked in the description down below. We will see you guys again soon. Stay well.